Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Should be live. Sound should be good. Video should be good. Let me know if it isn't. Okay. Please hit the like button and comment down below any thoughts that you have. And definitely participate in the live chat if you are watching live. It is a great way to add to the stream and ask any questions, and I will try and get to them. I usually can, and it really helps keep me going. It's very motivating to have you guys tune in live every week, much more so than likes or views. But we have a very interesting stream tonight, or today, depending on where you're at. I've been meaning to start these streams at like 3. Everybody who watches this channel knows I am not the best at being on time type of person, but I am someone who is at least consistent, so that is good. But last week was at 6, which was earlier than normal, and this one is at 3:40 Pacific time, so it's huge progress. We're definitely getting there, and I hope that effort is at least appreciated a little bit. So hello, Paulina. That is my wonderful wife in the chat. But I also will be discussing a major personal update and sharing something that I've wanted to share a long time on this channel. You might have been able to guess what it is depending on the thumbnail, but it is an explanation for some of just the I don't know, chaos that I feel at least has been around some of my content, chaotic sporadicness, I guess, the past few months. But most of the people that I've talked about have said that they haven't noticed at all, so that's good. But I definitely have felt a little disorganized, but there is a reason for that, and it is as legitimate an excuse as I think that you can get. So I used to work for PragerU, and the CEO there would say excuses are results all the time. And I mean, this is, I get the statement, but sometimes there's a reason for things. You have to accept that. So there has definitely been a reason for some things. But with that, please comment in the live chat, hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. Helps more people see this, share this with anybody who you think might find it interesting. But definitely, participate, like I said, in the live chat if you are watching live. So, 1 minute. Okay, so today we're going to, in general, talk about the definition of physics and science, because the more that I see these conversations about physics and science and the quest for fundamental theory, the more I realize that we might have serious issues with the definition of science and the definition of physics specifically, which you would think that it would be a specific definition, but I think that it's gotten very muddied, and we're going to talk about why that may be the case and how that might be contributing to the confusion that we have been facing in our quest to find the fundamental, and also find those who can actually contribute the most to finding the fundamental. Who should we be going to? Do you need to have a degree in physics? Do you need to have a degree in philosophy? Should you be a neurologist? Should you be a computer scientist? What should you be a biologist or a chemist? These are the questions that I feel like have been going on and on, especially recently, even though before recently it has been always assumed that it was physics or math, and now it's kind of seems to be all people from all different fields are contributing, and that doesn't mean that there are not patterns in who is contributing and how, but it definitely has uh, changed in that we have a much more diversity or much more diverse group that is contributing to this endeavor, and that's a good thing. So, but like I said, comment any questions that you have in the live chat. Last week we had such good participation. It was truly incredible, and it was one of the few times, not the first time, but one of the few times, especially in a while, that I could not get to everybody's question and read every comment in the chat. So if you do want me to see something, it would be very helpful for you to either put it as a super chat, which is greatly appreciated and helps contribute to upgrading this project, or you can tag me in it in the chat, and I will try and get it or see it that way. But if we have a lot of people commenting, it can get a little bit chaotic, especially when people start going back and forth with having conversations in the chat, which I highly encourage. So that's not what I'm not dissuading it. So with that, personal update, I guess. So many of you know that I'm married and have been for 2 years. It was my 2-year anniversary on Friday. We got married on July 14th of 2021, 7/14/21, on a Wednesday, and this Friday was 2 years since that day, which is just incredible. I mean, it has just flown by. I could not be more grateful to have the woman that I have as my wife. So, that is. I talk about marriage a lot on here, and people say things like, oh, they talk about the honeymoon phase and things like that. If you get actually married and it's marriage in a way that is, I guess, totally, integrated and with the kind of primary correct goal in mind for what marriage is supposed to kind of be, there is no real such thing as a honeymoon phase other than the honeymoon. And people say all the time, once you get past the honeymoon phase, there is no such thing really as a honeymoon phase. As soon as you get married, you're dealing with each other's real issues and the real issues of life together, and you have no idea what those will be. So, you have an idea of what some of them will be, but you have no idea when you will encounter all of them and how. And we have encountered them all from the very start of our marriage, and it has been an incredible journey. So I highly recommend marriage to anyone who is attracted to the opposite sex, and it is totally worth it. It's not easy, but people talk about how it's not easy. It's not hard either if you have the right person and you treat each other well. That's very important, to just treat each other well. I wonder how much this stream is actually going to be about physics, but yeah, I'm open to marriage questions at any time. Even though it has been 2 years, I've learned an enormous amount. So with that, this is my personal update. I will be welcoming a new sentient singularity into the world around Thanksgiving. And if you follow us or followed my channel closely, then you know that my wife and I have experienced a number of miscarriages, and so this has been quite a journey to get here. There's so much that has gone into this journey, and some of it I can share, some of it I can't, but like I said, to anyone who is planning on this or is going through this, I'm open and here for any questions or anything that you might want to know that might help you. But we are further along than we've ever gotten. Those miscarriages were very early, all of them, and this pregnancy has gone to, we are over halfway through at this point. So we're past the most, I guess, chaotic or most uncertain points, and usually, and we felt like we were at a place where we could share it. I told my family on July 4th. They didn't even know. I mean, they actually suspected. We got out of the car and nobody was surprised. But we had tried to keep it this private for a long time, just because we just needed to do it like that. And also, we wanted to tell my family in person this new sentient singularity to be born. My child is a girl, and that is just I don't know. This has just been an amazing process. This is their actual face. That is not insane, and we're very happy. And it has been, though, taken a lot when your wife is pregnant and you are her husband. You have a lot of things that you need to help her with, and so bear with me as we go forward. It has taken a lot of energy getting to here, and it will take a lot getting to the birth, and then even after that. So there's no real way to hide this anymore, which is part of the reason why we have to share it. My wife does not. She looks very pregnant at this point, so you can't really hide it. Very beautiful, but pregnancy is a beautiful thing, and but it's just not something that you can easily hide most of the time. At a certain point, it becomes obvious. So here is just that this is the post that we shared on social media, so that already on my Instagram. But yeah, kudos and hats off to my wonderful wife for just being an incredible partner through all of this, because life is challenging, and being married should make your life easier if you're doing it right. And my life is definitely easier with my wife, or at least encountering the challenges that are inevitable in life is easier when you have a good partner. It's a good way of putting it. Marriage comes with its own challenges, but it's not. If you treat each other well, like I said, and you picked a good partner, then it's not something that should add in very often to your stress. It should be something that kind of alleviates it, and that is definitely our marriage, and I very much appreciate that, because this is a very stressful thing. There is nothing that will make you realize the limits of your own control than trying to bring another sentient being into the world. It is something that you can do your best at doing, but it ultimately is not up to you. It is up to the sentient being above you. It is up to God. It is not up to us. And deeply grateful to be entrusted to be a parent, at least if as long as everything continues to go well, which it has been going very well. So it's almost beyond words to kind of describe, but it is an amazing thing. I don't really know exactly what to say, but it is just, I'm extremely grateful. But I'm very excited, but I expect a lot of sleepless nights when this baby is born, and I have had to increasingly do more and more to help my wife as our pregnancy progresses, and that's a good thing, but it does mean that sometimes I might need a little bit of grace from you guys if I'm a bit more inconsistent. But that is why this is what's going on in my life. It's a very good thing. We celebrated our anniversary last night, and it was very nice. We went and painted some figurines at one of those paint clay, where you paint a little terracotta or clay figure or whatever cup, and then they go and they fire it for you. So we did that, and then we went to a nice dinner, and made some decorations for the nursery. So it's been very nice. Yeah, that's that. My parents just had their 50-year anniversary, and they're great together. That's amazing. I watched my grandparents have their 50th anniversary, and my parents are not there yet, but they're still married. So, it is a lifetime commitment for sure. That is the definition of marriage, is that it is a lifetime commitment. And, there is so much meaning that comes out of your impact. Your meaning comes from impacting another sentient being, and this is the relationships in which you do that the most easily, or at least most universally for most people, is definitely through marriage, and then also through parenthood, and that is it's definitely, it's not something that it's something that we should honor and celebrate, and it is not something to be demeaned, like it has been. There's quite an anti-natalist movement in the world today. There's a narrative that we're overpopulated. That's not true, and people have kind of lost the sight of the purpose of marriage, the definition of marriage, the definition of gender, and the framework of gender, which we talked about last week. If you go through these experiences of marriage and to somebody of the opposite gender, or bringing another being into the world, having a child, or even just trying to have a child, you will see the necessity much more easily, and the reality of all of these things, and the beauty of all of these things, and kind of it becomes very intuitive and intrinsically understood what meaning is and where it comes from, and even if it's not something that you logically worked out, it is something that you can experience firsthand. It's not something that you have to study in school. This is something that is going to lead into kind of the next discussion that we have, which is kind of what on the fields that we have in our sciences, on our scientific fields, and how we define them, and how that frames us understanding fundamental reality, and frames our search for a theory of everything, or a fundamental theory. I really don't like the term theory of everything, but I understand why it is there. But it's that at a certain point, there are certain things about reality that must be experienced firsthand. And how do we link that must be experienced firsthand with our understanding of that, our attempt to understand things secondhand, I guess. And so there is a way to do that, but you have to have things in a proper hierarchy in order to link those two approaches to the world. And our sciences are very much a second hand in how they are taught. Our scientific fields, I don't want to say our sciences, because even then that change, as soon as you say the sciences, you are changing the definition of science, or you're putting a certain constraint on what it means. But it is one thing to study gender in the classroom and study the sociology and history of I don't know, the various institutions and that are linked to marriage, or to study human population or civilization at all in school. It's another thing to live it, and we all live it, but it is important to recognize that we live it, and accept our firsthand understandings of the world as legitimate information that we should incorporate into how we understand it. And so that is not something that is the way that that process is not exactly the same as what is normally the approach that is taken in the fields that we call, the fields of science in an academic setting. So we need to just kind of rethink things a bit. But yeah, look at that. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I can't even tell you just how I've wanted to just share this for months, and but we've waited, and some things have to remain private for various reasons, and some until they cannot anymore, and this cannot anymore, literally cannot. But yeah, it's something else that I did want to say. But intimacy is something that has kind of been lost, and we'll talk more about this on another stream eventually. By intimacy, I don't mean just sex. I mean intimacy as a definition as a concept that is relevant to many different aspects of life. And intimacy just means that you share certain things with some people that are restricted. You have bounds to what other people are allowed to be a part of at certain moments. At least we are inevitably all completely entangled, but there are barriers that do still exist, and intimacy is one of those ways in which you build barriers and keep a certain prioritization to the people in your life. Your family has certain things that it knows or should know that nobody outside your family should know. Your spouse and you should have a degree of transparency that and constant communication that you do not have with anyone else. You have experiences with them that you do not have and should not have with anyone else. And friends, you have friends that you tell things to that you don't tell to anyone else. This is what intimacy is. So if you're telling everything to everyone, you're sharing everything with everyone constantly, you don't have some type of prioritization to the things that you share and the experiences that you share and the information as well with certain people in your life, then you do eliminate intimacy completely. But we'll talk more about how that relates to sex and things like that in another future episode. But topic to come for sure. No pun intended. But here. See, congratulations. Congrats. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Nick. It's like the pod in closing in with the benefit of the internet it takes from in real life interactions, but subtly for people with coworkers and families as they are close with. Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. But yeah, crazy, so wild. I'm so excited. And if that's not coming through, it's because I'm honestly just at a loss for words. I was been wanting to share this for a while, and then when I go to share it, I feel like I don't know what words I should be using to share it. But yeah, we're having a baby, inshallah. But I also wanted to mention some other pieces of content that I've been watching that are very good. I know we talked about gender last week, and I posted some other videos on gender that others had made that I thought were pretty good in our Discord. If you're not a part of our Discord, private message me on Instagram and you can join. We have live calls on there every week with people, and it is a great time. And there's a bunch of channels that people share, and it's a very good community. Just private message me on Instagram, and I will send you the link. The links to my Instagram are below, Patreon's below, sentientsingularity.com is below, everything. But the other stream that I watched this past week that was actually very, very good and very unique is Curt discussion with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I there's a lot to the discussion, and we'll talk about a couple things that were mentioned in it because it's relevant to this stream. But I do highly recommend that you watch the whole entire discussion that they had, because it was just unique that to see Neil in a setting that is very different from most of the settings that you see him in. Neil deGrasse Tyson, for those who are not familiar, him and Michio Kaku, and you could even say probably Brian Greene, and at some point Stephen Hawking as well. They were all, they are or were, in the case of Stephen Hawking, rest in peace. They were, popular scientific explainers on documentaries and specials and things like that. And I grew up watching pretty much all of these guys talk about science, and I found it very inspiring. And when Neil deGrasse Tyson goes on many different podcasts, I believe he would mostly be called an astrophysicist, but maybe even an astronomer might be a better term. I don't really know. I was looking up the difference between cosmologist, astrophysicist, and astronomer this week because I was like, well, I don't really know where the lines are anymore. But it was the first time that I've seen him really having a discussion with somebody whose physics understanding appears to be quite a bit above Neil, and it was a much more kind of real back and forth. And I really appreciated that. Most of the time it's people like Joe Rogan or something asking Neil deGrasse Tyson questions about science, I don't know, astrophysics and space and things like that. And then the answers are kind of just accepted and assumed to be accurate. But it was the first time I had seen anyone really challenging Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it was quite interesting and entertaining to watch. But I will also say that really appreciated that it seemed like both Curt and Neil were having a blast, like the whole talk, and kept a good attitude the whole time, and that is what makes for a good discussion, is when honesty and I guess just good spirits, and that talk definitely had that. So I highly recommend it. It was good. It was very good. It was my favorite discussion I've ever seen with Neil deGrasse Tyson. But so this clip right here is about philosophy and physics, and it's just a clip of their whole talk. I will link their whole talk below. I'm not sure if I had done it yet, but if not, then I will after the stream. But that I don't even have I don't have a degree in philosophy. I've taken philosophy classes in college, but and I seem to have a knack for it, but I don't have a degree in philosophy. But there's definitely more of a philosophical approach that has been taken to this, the origins of sentient singularity theory, as opposed to a mathematical or physics-based approach as far as our current understanding of mathematics and physics. And this, the role of philosophy and in physics kind of came up in their discussion, and I wanted to share that. So,
it is physics. Like, physics is understanding what reality is. So we have to put an asterisk on what reality is, because who the heck knows what reality is? But physicists are trying to understand what that is. Someone like Tim Maudlin would say, hey, which I agree with, and I never put in these words before, quantum theory is never talked about in university as a physicist. You'd learn quantum mechanics and quantum field theory, but he would say, a theory tells you what the heck you're dealing with. It talks about ontology. So there needs to be that component as well.
Why does it need to be if what we're doing still works? It needs to be to you, the philosopher, but to me, the practicing scientist that's built circuit boards based on a complete understanding of how quantum physics works. I don't need to know that. That doesn't mean I don't want to know it, but the search for that answer, if it distracts me from other progress I will make, in this physical universe, and I'm a practicing scientist, that's how I'm going to choose my paths in that way. So yeah, quantum physics, who was it that said the day you understand quantum physics is the day you can be certain you don't? Because it's not
There are variations on that.
our native senses to interpret. And
Yeah.
okay.
So if that's one view. You can just take the view that, hey, whatever is useful, let me just build something with it.
And that's how I think of physics. That's how I think of physics.
Yeah.
Physics is matter, motion, and energy, and every way that allows me to predict the future of those systems so that I can exploit it to the benefit of civilization and intellectual pursuit.
Okay, we'll continue that in a minute, but this is very interesting because you can't really say he's wrong or right in this, or I wouldn't say he's wrong or right. It just matters on what you're going to pick. Like, if you're going to define physics a certain way, it doesn't really matter what the definition is as long as it is consistent. And that's the problem with the definition of physics today, I think, and also science in general. And it's interesting that the way that he's describing science here is kind of how I would describe engineering, which I don't know the line between them exactly, other than one of them is about discovery specifically and the other one is about application. But I don't really know if we should have ever separated studying the world without a goal in mind, and which means without application as an expectation. And that is maybe the issue with the definition of science now, is that its approach is that it is, or its assumption is that it is not biased, or it's an unbiased approach to understanding the world, or that it shouldn't have bias, or that it should be goalless almost, and that it should basically just be the way the task of studying what is, and not trying to figure out what should be, essentially, but the task of studying what is. And I think that is an explanation that works if you're going to restrict science to experimentation. Then I would say, yeah, if science is solely defined by kind of this experimental context that is not at all expansive beyond that, then maybe you could say that about science. But even then, I think that you're going to you can't truly understand the results of what you see, nor can you make them valuable without actually having a goal in mind when pursuing this. So I think that this is kind of why we are so confused, and also because science has now been replaced. It is a replacement for the word truth when we say that's science. In many ways, in the common conversation, especially, to say that's science, that is, people are substituting for the word truth, and that's a little different than what Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying, where he's saying that me as the practicing scientist, trying to figure out how to make more new, better circuit boards and measurement tools and things like that. I don't need to know the ontology of reality. I just need to know its properties enough to exploit it. And this, to me, sounds exactly like engineering. And if that's engineering, and then what is and then what is the technical definition of science? I don't know. And then when we start saying things like the sciences, are hard sciences, the natural sciences, it's like what when you say these sciences, it creates a linguistic framework that now must be built on with some degree of consistency. But if it's starting off in a framework that's not fundamentally bound and consistent, then you're going to go off in a direction that it maybe is consistent with the initial place in which you started, but isn't consistent with the truth of fundamental reality. And so this is kind of where we're at this point, and I think that it's confusing our our next step in our understanding of the world is that the axioms, we're going to get to what fundamental axioms and what they are, what their goal purpose is, but the axioms of science, with quotes, are kind of very vague, and that does not allow for us to go forward with any consistency. So, but the interesting thing is that when he says that's what physics is to me, is understanding rules that I can exploit in order to build the next telescope or microchip. That to me is engineering. It's not actually about understanding the reality of reality. It's about understanding the rules of reality outside of an ontology, which, good luck, figuring out the fundamental rules without figuring out the fundamental constraints of those rules, which you only would understand by figuring out the fundamental nature of reality. So, but it's causing an issue. And then even when you get within physics as a field of study, it's pretty widely recognized, even if it's not discussed in this manner, is that we have two definitions of physics, and that is kind of relativistic physics, which I would include Newtonian physics in there, and also quantum physics, or quantum mechanics, or however, whatever term you're going to use for it exactly, but studying elementary particles and instead of fluid dynamics and thermodynamics and gravity and things like that. But there is an attempt to unify these, and it's not working in the way that they've been trying, and that is usually the accepted definition of a theory of everything, is a theory that unifies these two halves of physics. And I think that there might be actually that these are the two halves of physics, but if that is true, then you need to find a context, an ontology for each of them that would be a unified ontology, and that isn't consistent with what Neil deGrasse Tyson says is physics. So it's tough where we have so many different definitions of the context of physics, which would be science, and we have so many different definitions of physics at this point, or at least three definitions of physics, and that are not based on an understanding of fundamental reality. And so we're starting to see certain new proposed theories, like integrated information theory, sentient singularity theory, conscious agent theory, that are an attempt to be this unified context of physics, and maybe even quite a bit more, but depending on what you think physics is. But we need to probably just change the approach entirely, and we'll talk about that. But this clip continues.
I think of physics.
Okay, so there's a couple of points there. Number one, there's a value in there, which isn't derivable from the physical facts.
What do you mean a value? What do you mean? I like it.
Because you want to do something that's good. You want to do something useful. So you're not just doing anything.
No, I didn't say useful. Did I say useful? Let me give a different word. Let me be more precise.
Sure.
And less precise at the same time. I'd like to know ever more about how the universe works, so that I can invoke it in the progress of civilization. And by progress, I mean new understandings. The history of this exercise often, hardly ever doesn't, convert to new inventions, new means of living, to prolong our benefits to our health, our longevity, and just our enlightenment about how the universe works. So that's how I think of physics, and at the most fundamental level, with chemistry layered on that, and then biology layered on top of that.
I think that's an unfair characterization of how physics developed, and even develops to this day. Now, as for modern examples, okay, let's put that aside.
But what makes it unfair? What makes it unfair?
Well, Einstein thought plenty about Mach's principle, and Einstein also thought about other philosophical positions.
Oh, by the way, Mach's principle was a philosopher from the 19th century. that's pre the era that I'm describing here, in terms of the value and influence of philosophers in the thinking of a modern physicist who's making actual discoveries. So you can mention Mach, and I'll give you Mach, but there's not much after Mach that you can cite. Yeah, but go on.
John Bell of the Bell's theorems that we just mentioned, or the Bell's inequalities of the Nobel Prize, he was influenced.
Yeah, but John Bell. Wait, question to you: was he trained as a philosopher or as a physicist? That's kind of my point here. I think he was trained as a physicist, and so, and not to be pedantic about it, but it's the value of learning how the physical universe works with laboratories, okay, relative to armchairs. That's really what I'm getting at here. But sure, it's great. The Bell's inequality theorem, very important, very thought-provoking, as any good philosophical conclusion should be.
Yeah, so I think we're speaking past one another, so let me be precise, because I don't want to get misconstrued. What I'm saying is that physics benefits from an understanding of philosophy. And also,
it did, especially
physical statements by a physicist have embedded in them philosophical assumptions. So
yes,
if we
do.
say something about material, there's like materialism is in there. What is that? What is a material? Can we define it specifically? Musings, like actually sitting and thinking about what the heck exists. What is the nature of this? What is space-time? You mentioned that this is something we don't talk about much. Actually, there's several people who think that space-time is something that's emergent. And so they think about, well, are we on the boundary? Are we in the bulk? Is it discrete? Is it not? What does that mean? Is it real? Does it have a variable associated with it, like there before we measure it?
Yeah, I got you. A characteristic, a thing. Yeah. That's all good.
Does our consciousness have something to do with it? There's like 30 interpretations of quantum mechanics. Maybe 4 of them have to do with consciousness. But still, those are all...
Oh, by the way, since we actually really don't understand consciousness, and the evidence that we don't understand it is that people keep writing books on it, all right, claiming they know it. That's the evidence that we don't know anything about it. To take consciousness, about which we know very little, to explain something in quantum physics, or to have quantum physics, an understanding of quantum physics that nobody has, commingle with consciousness, feels like very tentative land to stand on. To take two things that are not deeply understood and use one to explain the other. I'm disturbed when I see people do that. Not that overstates it. I'm intrigued that people have the urge to do it, but I've make sure I do not ever have the urge to explain something I don't understand with something else I don't understand. I don't think that's the wisest path to be on. It's a fun.
Okay. And here's where I think that this gets very, very off path, but in traditional academic circles right now, I don't even want to say traditional, because I think that this is actually a fairly new phenomenon in the last century, the way that we think about physics and science in general, and I think it's very new. But one of the things that I will agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson on is that his statement was that philosophy is kind of useless to physicists today, and but he does admit that in the past it wasn't, and I actually will give him this, and I think that this is evidence, though, of a systemic issue across all fields that is present in mathematics, present in physics, present in philosophy, present in even things like history and political science, quote unquote, and economics, and I mean it's literally everywhere. Biology, chemistry, gender studies, everything. And I'm not somebody who actually thinks that we should be giving that they're like the hard sciences and the not hard sciences. Although I do see the why people have come up with that term. I actually think that there is that anything that is the truth, and that's it. So, if you're studying it, then that means that there is a truth implied. So to say that there is hard sciences and a not so hard sciences, I think is inconsistent with even the goal of studying it in the first place. So that's so I'm not going to differentiate between those really, but I think that he's right about philosophy not being very relevant or valuable to physics in the last I don't know, you could say 100 years, maybe more than 50 years. But that's because philosophy has failed completely anyways, and because physics is failing. And that's pretty apparent with the lack of fundamental breakthroughs in physics, and I would say that there's definitely a lack of fundamental breakthroughs in physics, especially those that are evident in engineering applications, but it's or any other, even social engineering applications, if there would be lessons from it, which I think there would be. So this is tough because you have to kind of recognize already that the issue is systemic in order to kind of think beyond this present observed real situation, which is that physics and philosophy have been basically divorced from each other at this point. This divorcing or decoupling has resulted in a lack of, as Curt stated, an ontology of physics, which means there's no context to what any of the current structures that we observe are, and why, which means you cannot deduce why they are there. What is the standard model of elementary particles? What is an elementary particle? What is a fermion versus a boson? What is a quark versus a lepton? What is a neutrino versus an electron? Like, this is not something that you can make sense of without some type of ontology to frame it all. And that means that you have to have a philosophical approach taken to understanding this, I think, or even a theological approach. But we have intentionally divorced these things. Even Eric Weinstein, and I don't know how much he really agrees with this in the process of discovery, but when it comes to public presentation, he at least has put forward this opinion, at least in the past, and he's welcome to change his mind at any point, just like anyone, that a fundamental theory or a theory of everything, at least a theory of everything in a physics context, which if that's the only context, then I don't really know. There's so many issues with that. There's just so many assumptions, and we'll get into that. Like I said, what is the definition of physics? It does not need to propose an origin of the universe, and it does not need, or of anything really, is what it's saying. Like, it's a theory of everything that does not need to include an origin for everything, and it also does not need to be self-referencing, in that it does not need to follow its own patterns that it is describing. And I think that this is not it. This could be true of certain theories that are more fundamental than are currently accepted mainstream theories, but it is not true of an actual fundamental theory, a theory that is the most fundamental, not a theory that is just more fundamental. So it might be that there is a true theory that's more fundamental than any other theory that we have currently been able to prove, essentially, or observe consistently, but it cannot be true of a truly fundamental theory. And so this creates there is a conscious effort constantly to detach the true realities of philosophy from physics and mathematics and science, science in general. And what this destroys is it takes away your most valuable tool for experimentation and observation of the universe, and the most valuable tool that you use to be aware of reality is no longer considered valid in this conversation, even though it's also an unavoidable tool. So you're denying the use of a tool that you are always using, but you are and you're not allowing for the intentional use of a tool that you are always using anyways, which is your firsthand experience with not even just an observation that you make of the outside world, like you're observing birds or eating certain foods or something, and you log it down. But also your observation, your super subjective observations, which are your first person experiences with your own self, not with others outside or with the world beyond you, which doesn't really exist. But it does, but it also it's not independent of your own of the manifold structure of your own mind. And so you must accept this, realize that it is a fundamental axiom, and build on it properly. And to do so otherwise is impossible to make true, consistent, coherent progress going forward without building on a fundamental foundation. I saw a news story today that was like some giant house in Palos Verdes, in Orange County, California. It was built on a cliff, and it just like fell off. The cliff fell into the ocean. And I'm sure that when they built that house, they spared almost no expense in just making sure that its foundation was, very strong. But it's built on sand that falls into the ocean, so that doesn't, eventually that happens with information as well. So it must be built on the absolute most foundationally true bit of information, all other information, or else it's going to eventually unravel, because it's a giant knot that is self-referencing. And so eventually there is nothing to reference that is truly there always and cannot, and it is never not there. Then you eventually have a knot that unwinds. And so that is a theory that falls apart, or an understanding that falls apart. So I think that this is a very interesting, exchange. I remember when I first started this project of sentient singularity theory, I was watching Sean Carroll, who I have made, arguments against many of his foundational arguments and his approach to physics in some of my first videos that I put up. And but he was one of the people that inspired me, and also that was used by me as a teacher, a good teacher, about what we currently believe is or accept as the framework for quantum mechanics and physics, general relativity, and other aspects of physics in general. And I watched hours and hours of his lectures, and most of them are just great, and with few exceptions that I take enormous opposition to. But those ones are the frame. They will be the foundation that frames the rest of your understanding on even the things that he's lectured on. That I think those lectures are great. If you want to learn what we currently think, what is currently thought, or what is currently accepted within mainstream physics, you should definitely listen to Sean Carroll's lectures. But he went on Joe Rogan, and he said that there is an enormous opportunity for philosophers to contribute to physics. And I heard that him say that right at the perfect time for me to need to hear it, and I appreciate that. I'm grateful for him saying that and for me hearing it, and it was one of the inspiring pushes for me to be like, okay, you can actually be a valuable voice in this discussion and can make contributions. So give it a shot at least. Even though he blocked me on Twitter at this point for the clip that I had gave my commentary on from his lecture, God is not a good theory. You can watch that in one of the first few videos that I put up on this channel. It was not live. It was produced first, so if you're looking in the live section, you won't find it. But still, very appreciative of that message that he gave. But I also recognize that philosophy is extremely screwed, and the problem with it is the same exact problem that is in every other field, including physics, is that it's all coming from secondhand information because of the way that we teach these fields in schools. And, if you're going to take gender studies in school, okay, let me tell you that my relationship with my wife and my experience of pregnancy that we're having right now and things like that has taught me far more definitely true things about gender than any gender studies class will teach you in school. And that is usually not even accepted anymore, which is insane as a legitimate source of information, even though it is the source of information that we cannot deny, and we do so at our own peril as our firsthand experience. So we do exist, though, and so we must take certain firsthand approach to understanding existence as well. And you cannot just learn in school by memorizing equations and models that have been created in the past, which are extremely useful, I admit, but that does not, at a certain point, you need an ontology that is a unified ontology for everything else in order to allow for it to be understood and even applied in a coherent fashion, which does require at this point a total rewrite of our understanding of our approach to understanding everything. You can't have these lines of these are the hard sciences, physics and math and biology and chemistry, and these are the soft sciences, philosophy, morality, theology, etc. That's all false. So, I've talked about this before. I've had philosophy PhDs talk to me, constantly when I first started this project, especially, and many of them were writing their thesis on why consciousness is an illusion, which is just they haven't even. If you should be doing the philosophy, or you should be philosophizing about what the definition is of illusion and the definition is of consciousness before you should even write a thesis about why consciousness is an illusion. I highly doubt that was done with the rigor that was necessary for them to have actually understood what they were writing, because if they did, then they wouldn't have written what they were writing or tried to. And also I remember listening to this guy, probably IQ off the charts, guys, in a Discord discussion many years ago, probably like 3 years ago at this point. And he was a philosophy PhD. He might have even been a professor. And he's going on and on for over an hour about how so-and-so, I think it was Jordan Peterson, is wrong about what Marxism is, and that he needs to realize that the reality is that there's 3 Marxes and not 1 Marx, and it was mental masturbation is the best way to put it. And I love to think, so I'm not saying that I'm not guilty of just kind of just exploring ideas in my own mind for the sake of my own entertainment, but at the same time, you have to recognize when that is happening versus when is you actually have like a goal in mind and an overarching context to what it is that you're doing, or how it is that you're defining something. And I had to stop him at a certain point because it just was endless. It was literally just going in a circle and a circle and a circle. And I said, what is philosophy? In 2 sentences to a paragraph, quickly, what is philosophy? And he said, if I could tell you the definition of philosophy in a paragraph or 2, then it wouldn't be philosophy. And that in and of itself was just such a mental masturbatory moment. And it was just entertaining thing to say, but also totally useless and also kind of undermining of everything that he puts energy into, which is, who wants to do that? But the fact that he didn't even realize that that's what he had done is a problem. I mean, it's kind of a trump card that you can pull, and it makes you feel like, or makes others want to listen to you sometimes because they're like, oh wow, like he just understands things so beyond me. It's the same exact thing as what Neil deGrasse Tyson said of like, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics. If I could explain philosophy in a single paragraph, then it wouldn't be philosophy. Bullshit. If that's the case, then stop. Then you need to stop studying completely and go and open a cookie shop or something else, because at least that would be more useful. Do not be a philosopher if you think that you can't explain philosophy in a single sentence. Do not be a physicist if you really believe in the statement of, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics. That's insane. It's insane to go into those fields and believe that these things are true. But the issue is that our current definition of philosophy is, quote unquote, the love of wisdom. And if you look it up, that's where it's written everywhere. This is not what I learned in school. And from my philosophy professor when I was in college, he gave a different definition of philosophy. And for years, I accepted it as the academic standard narrative. And it's not. I've actually never heard it said by anybody else but him, but it took me years before I even looked into it to see whether or not what he was saying was consistent with what everybody else was saying. And he defined philosophy as the study of perspective. And this is a much, much better definition for philosophy. If philosophy is something that you study, it is the study of perspective. What is biology is the study of something. What is chemistry is the study of something. What is physics should be the study of something. That's what these fields are, is they are fields of study. And I'm not exactly sure where the definition of philosophy as the love of wisdom came from, and I will admit that in a certain point in the past, particularly when theism was much more common in academia, and it was actually standard in academia, it makes sense to say that philosophy is the love of wisdom. It is you trying to figure out what is wanted almost by the wise one. You know, what is truly truest to the wisest one, which is God. And in doing so, in pursuing that is to love them, but because love is an action. But now it's not. That's not the case anymore with philosophy. Philosophy has become essentially memorizing what others have done in the past, have said in the past, and writing about it and giving your opinions on it, instead of truly taking a step back and trying to figure out what the first question even is. I saw Elon Musk post on Twitter, I think, pretty recently, and also Brian Keating, where they were talking. They were referencing. I think Brian Keating was referencing a tweet by Elon Musk about his new app of everything, or a new AI company, which we will talk about. I haven't looked enough into it to be comfortable talking about it yet, but he said they started both talking about what is the fundamental question, what's the most fundamental questions that have not been answered yet, and we haven't even asked. We should be asking what's the most fundamental question that you could ask, and I think that you would get a lot of wisdom from that, from answering it. And what I've talked about that on this channel before. I think the most fundamental question that you can ask is, what is the most fundamental question, or what is the first question? It is the first question. It's also the answer to itself, which is just fascinating. I've tried to think of other questions that answer themselves, and I have not been able to do so. So if you can, put it in the chat, or comment it down, in the comments. I have not been able to think of any that I wouldn't have to put a lot of effort into constructing. I'm looking for one that just kind of naturally is its own answer. That is only one that I have found, which is the first question, which is, what is the first question? And the answer to it is, what is the first question? Because it answers itself. already. It's like supernatural. It's not even just natural in its answering of itself, or in getting the answer. The answer to the question is supernaturally given to you in a way, but it also has implications about existence that are profound, and about the axioms of existence that we should be assuming. And so I'll get to that in a minute. But that is philosophy. It is taking your own perception into account, and perspectives, and the perspectives of others, and trying to relate them together in a way that makes them all make sense and contextualizes them all. That's really what it is. It is the study of perspective. If it is anything, if it's the love of wisdom, that's kind of an irrelevant statement today, even though I do think that the process of doing true philosophy ends up being, if you're good and you're getting the right answers, it does end up being the love of wisdom. But that said, you can't call it the love of wisdom until you've already gotten there and realized that that's what you end up doing if you're doing it properly. And so if you say it's the love of wisdom to people who who are not actually like arriving and have not even arrived yet at what is the first and second questions of everything, then they probably have not actually achieved that, like the fundamental wisdom of regarding reality yet. Even if you've achieved some wisdom because, I don't know, you've studied Stoicism or something like that, or anything else, any other philosophies, philosophical schools of thought that have wisdom in them. But most of them that do have true wisdom in them are based on first-hand experience, and that, without that being recognized, good luck contextualizing them. And also they would be founded on fundamental axioms that would be answered by the very first questions. And there is a first question, there is a second question, there is probably a third question, but I have not actually deduced it yet. That's probably a good thing. I mean, maybe I thought of a potential answer, but we'll get to it. I think it might be, what should I do? But I don't know. But yeah, philosophy right now, totally useless. So is physics, so is mathematics, so is biology and chemistry and everything else. Taxonomy. It's all so confused. So we have to start at the beginning, not by trying to unify these fields that we have no context to yet, but by looking at what we can deduce as most true, and what we should hold as the most foundational axioms. And so something that I'm trying to learn more about, and we're going to discuss a lot more in a future episode on this channel, is integrated information theory. And this theory is a theory, quote-unquote theory of consciousness, and also therefore a theory of information. And it is an attempt to mathematically frame consciousness, which I think that already this is not the approach is already not going to allow for it to be as fundamental as it could be, but it's really close. I mean, it is getting there. And so that's why I do want to talk about it. But so this is kind of what I want to, a next clip that I want to show on integrated information theory.
I think, therefore I am.
What Descartes meant by that is, even if the whole world is an illusion, just a dream, then in the real world,
there must be real you who sees that dream. Thus, he concluded, the only thing that exists beyond any doubt is you and your consciousness. But how did it turn out that the only thing definitely existing is something we can't explain without religion or magic? Or better said, we couldn't explain, until recently.
integrated information theory, developed by Giulio Tononi from University of Wisconsin-Madison, says that consciousness of the system is information generated above and beyond the information generated by the parts of this system. Take the word honeymoon. It consists of two parts, honey and moon. But together, they don't only mean honey and moon, but also add their extra meaning of a newly married couple trip. But let me demonstrate you on a real example. Consider.
Okay, what are the odds that the linguistic example that he gives is honeymoon when I was talking about honeymoon and honeymoon phase and things like that at the beginning of this stream? That's probably 100%. But that in and of itself is very similar to essentially many things that I have mentioned, which if you follow this channel and have not seen this yet, this is an essential thing, I think, to watch, which was my intro into the Theories of Everything YouTube channel, Curt YouTube channel's Pace 1 contest, which is the physics and consciousness competition. And this is kind of the fundamental axioms that I put forth as far as that we must assume about fundamental reality. You cannot use secondhand information. We want to try and build our universe. Then we have to try and build one on foundational assumptions about fundamental existence. If we wanted to use foundational assumptions about the nature of existence, there are two tools that we can use. The first one is logic. So what can we logically deduce about the nature of existence? Well, that it's singular. Existence, by definition, includes all that exists, which means it's one, okay? The second tool that we can use to deduce foundational assumptions about the nature of existence is first-hand personal experience. You cannot use second-hand information in order to make assumptions about the foundational nature of existence, because second-hand information is built on previous assumptions always. So, given our experiences, what can we deduce about the fundamental nature of existence? What is the foundation of our understanding of our experiences? The foundation of all of our understanding is the truth that we hold above all other truths. It is the assumption that you hold as true above all other assumptions. In order to figure out the assumption that you use to judge all other assumptions by regarding your experiences, you have to ask yourself, what is the truest thing that I know? There is only one answer to this question, and that answer is I am. If the truest thing that I can know is that I am, what does that imply about the foundational nature of our reality? Well, break it down. I, meaning someone, a sentient someone. Am, meaning existing. I am means sentient someone exists. It means someone exists. There is nothing truer that you know. Every other assumption that I have about my experience, about my reality, about all reality that I can observe, this is true of everyone, rides on that one assumption that someone exists. That means that to the best of our knowledge, foundational reality is a someone who exists. You cannot argue against that. Every argument that you would put forth would be based on other assumptions. Okay, so this is true. And if it's not, argue against it, please. I want to see someone disprove this if it is true, obviously. You won't be able to do it, though, but I do encourage you to do it if you think that you can do it. But I doubt you can. But like I said, I'm not trying to discourage you, but if but if you can do it, then try. And it's interesting that philosophy, kind of the most well-known philosophical deduction ever made, or lesson that's ever been, or statement that's ever come out of philosophy is, I would say, I think, therefore I am. And it is so universally thought about, but nobody thinks about the implications that it brings forth, and because they didn't deduce it on their own, they're just accepting it as, okay, that's philosophy, is I think, therefore I am. But they're not even thinking about that as an aspect of the hard sciences, quote unquote. That must be part of the ontology of physics and math and biology and chemistry and et cetera, et cetera. And so, and I actually think that there's a more fundamental way of even describing it, which is I feel, therefore I am, even though feeling and thinking are two sides of one coin. I would say feeling is more fundamental than even thinking. One of them is an active process, and only really and can be miscontextualized. The other one is kind of intrinsically contextualized and is the alpha and omega of thinking. The beginning and the end of a thought is a feeling. You have a thought, you have a feeling, it motivates a specific thought. That thought leads to a certain conclusion. That conclusion leads to a certain feeling. If you're actually having a legitimate thought, any legitimate thought, and when I say legitimate, I mean one that is has a true context, and that is honest and not you're tricking yourself into thinking that you're thinking about something, which a lot of times we do very often. But an honestly motivated thought is motivated by feeling, and it results in a feeling because it starts with a feeling, and so it starts with how it's contextualized in its relationship with you and your own existence, and then it should end with that as well, and so that would produce a feeling. Any thought that does not result in a feeling, I would say, is not a true thought. If somebody says, like Neil deGrasse Tyson or something, says that is the way that things are, and so why do they need to be any different? Why should we think about them being any different? I don't need to think about why things are. I just need to know how the universe is, but I don't need to know why the universe is or what it is. I just need to know how it is. And that's basically what he stated, is kind of how he sees science and physics specifically. And this is not a true thought, because it leads to no feelings. Your thoughts on what the universe is and how it is and why it is and who it is eventually, should produce feelings to you. Otherwise, I would argue that you did not properly contextualize it. But integrated information theory seems to start with similar axioms to what I have stated, and that are because they are the axioms. And so let's look here. Integrated information theory axioms. So here we go. Wow. Integrated information theory of consciousness. Integrated information theory offers an explanation for the nature and source of consciousness initially proposed by I'm not even going to try and say his name because I will botch it, but I apologize. That's his name right there. I think he's Italian. It claims that consciousness is identical to a certain type of information, the realization of which requires physical, not merely functional integration, and which can be measured mathematically according to the phi metric. I would say that a fundamental theory should explain the origins of even numbers and quantities itself, and therefore it precedes mathematics instead of it. It's not a mathematical theory. It is a theory that would explain even mathematics. But I'm not saying integrated information theory is false or not correct. I'm just saying if it is a mathematical theory of consciousness, or a theory of consciousness that uses mathematics instead of explains the origins of mathematics, then it isn't as fundamental a theory as could possibly be, but it still could be true. So these are the axioms, and I believe there's 5 of them, but yeah. First, the following from the fundamental Cartesian thought is the axiom of existence. Consciousness is real and undeniable. Therefore, moreover, a subject's consciousness has this reality intrinsically. It exists from its own perspective. That is true. Second, consciousness has composition. In other words, each experience has structure, color, and shape, for example. Structural structure visual experience. Such structure allows for various distinctions. Basically, the dimensions of mind. If a mind exists, it has dimensions that allow for it to process information, or aka interpret information. If information cannot be interpreted, it is not information. Which means it should this mental manifold structure would contextualize information, and because information out of context is not information, because actually the reality is that information is context. But anyways, third is the axiom of information. The way an experience is distinguished, the way an experience is distinguishes it from other possible experiences. An experience specifies it is specific to certain things, distinct from others. So it is like a moment. It's like moments. There are moments that are, you could also call experiences. There are experiences within our experience. There are moments of experience within our experience. This is like why we need to really focus on how we talk about these things. Fourth, consciousness has the characteristic of integration. The elements of an experience are interdependent. For example, the particular colors and shapes that structure a visual conscious state are experienced together. As we read these words, we experience the font shape, and letter color inseparably. We do not have isolated experiences of each and then add them together. This integration means that consciousness is irreducible to separate elements. Consciousness is unified. Basically, what this is also saying is exactly what I said above, which is that information is context in and of itself, which means that information is only information in the context of other information. So the relationship, symmetry patterns and lineages and hierarchies are intrinsic to to information in and of itself, and therefore to information processing, and therefore to mind itself. And this is why if this is true, right here, if any of this is true, really, then Neil deGrasse Tyson's thoughts on of how we should approach physics and is false. Or if physics is trying to understand reality, which was Curt's original definition, is that physics is trying to understand reality. I don't know if that's the best definition. It might be a good definition. I don't know. I think, I don't know. Maybe metaphysics is the best definition, but at the same time, this is where we'll get into that in a minute. But hold on. Fifth final axiom that they have is consciousness has the property of exclusion. Every experience has borders, precisely because consciousness specifies certain things and excludes others, and it specifies certain beings and excludes others. Consciousness also flows at a particular speed. I don't know what this is. What this means. It feels different from this. I don't know what that is. So, but what's interesting about these is that I would agree with this, and I would agree with this, and this, but I would say that they are the same one, actually. And that, and also this, but this is almost, it's a much more convoluted kind of addressing of the implications of my very first axiom that I had said at the beginning of the clip that I showed you of my own video, which is that existence includes all that exists, and therefore existence is singular. So something about being finite or a singular in nature is related to existence. It's built on a singularity, and then you start to look at sentience, and you look at your own sentience and you realize that it is a separate sentience from your dog's sentience, and that sentience is different from, your neighbor's sentience, and so these are all singular sentient beings that have, to some degree, boundaries between them, and so there's a singularity to sentience, and also sentience is the fundamental nature of reality as far as we can perceive. There is nothing that we can know more truly. It's the first question. What is the first question? Answers itself. What is the first question? It means that it's like when God is asked in the Bible by Moses, who are you, essentially? And God responds, I am that I am. I am. It's the combination. This is why the scripture, regardless of your thoughts, is, if you really dived into it honestly, there's just endless wisdom. And in this one statement of I am that I am, he's combined. It's like God is combined. If you believe that this is from God, this answer combines both of the first two questions about reality, and both of the fundamental axioms that we can have about reality is that it's this self-referential, enclosed, singular, isolated system, and it's sentient. God's answer in the Bible to "Who are you?" isn't, and first of all, Moses doesn't ask "What are you?" He asks "Who are you?" And the answer is I am, meaning sentient someone. Am meaning exist, essentially. I am the sentient someone that exists. And it's interesting. It's like when you say, what is the first question? The answer is, what is the first question? And then the second question is, what is the truest thing that I know? And the answer to that is, I am. When you combine these two, you get a self-referential I am, which is I am that I am. I am the I am, almost. I am the one, sentience that is, the alpha and omega, at the bottom and the top, and the beginning and the end, and also, that there is also other I ams. I am that I am. I am the I am. It's like, you would not, you could say I am, but you can't say I am the I am. But God could say I am the I am. The singular being that is existence itself, that is a sentient being, could say I am the I am. It's like, we very often say I am that I am, but I think it may be even a better way of putting that. This is just an assumption, is that kind of just the way that we would understand it better is I am the I am. I am the sentient. I am sentience itself. I am the source of sentience itself, and because I am I am sentience itself and existence itself, and the source of every other sentient being's existence. You could unfold from that single statement everything, if it's true. Of course you would be able to, if it's true. Even if you don't believe that it's true, if you assume that it's true for the sake of argument, then you have to concede that you would be able to unfold everything else from it. And that's just amazing. It implies that there's some truth to it because you can build on it. It's not an empty statement. But then this fifth axiom, sentient singularity theory would imply that there's actually kind of, I mean, you could, if you were going to look at the fundamental axioms of reality, there would be like a superposition of one, which you would break down into two, or there would be like four, probably 2, 3, 4, depending on how you were looking at it. But 5 is a little bit, hey, go lay down. Sorry, it's my dog. Go lay down. This is, it's interesting that there's this 5th one here in this list of axioms, and it would, my theory, the pattern in my theory would imply that that's kind of would be a summarizing axiom, which is 5th, consciousness has the property of exclusion. Every experience has its borders precisely because consciousness specifies certain things, it excludes others. Consciousness also flows at a particular rate of speed. I don't know the particular rate of speed thing. That seems to be totally separate from the previous sentences. But the idea that consciousness has borders it's kind of, and experience has its borders even, it's kind of a summarizing, or it's like a lessons that come from summarizing the preceding 4 axioms, which you could probably break down into 2. And that is, and it makes sense that our theory of fundamental reality would be a 2 axiom theory, probably, because if the 2 axioms that I propose are true, it means that there's an initial sentience that is existence itself, and there's you. So now there's 2 beings that are contextualizing any kind of axiom. So it's not just, if it was just from God's perspective, what is the axioms of how could you totally sum up everything that you know to most fundamentally be true? God could say, I am the I am. I am that is, I am that I am. It's like you almost can't even say it in a way that makes perfect sense to us without breaking it down. But you could say it in a singular statement, but you can't say it from our perspective in a singular statement. It has to be broken down probably into 2 because you're already assuming that there's at least 2 sentient beings in existence, you and the one that is everything, and everything else that includes and encapsulates everything else, everyone else that there is. So it's very interesting. So the way that this is broken down, though, implies a lot of truth to it. It also implies that they could get a bit more fundamental. But even the idea that you take a bit of information essentially, and or information, and then in a certain context that information is more than the sum of it. That is something that's very central to all the models of my work. Is you start with 1 bit of information, and from there you get 3 bits of information after that. Then you have 4 bits of information, and then you have inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and from there you get 6, because you have oneness within and oneness without, and then you get 9, and from there it just grows and grows and grows according to a specific pattern. But that this is all coming from 1, so you're getting more information than from the process of information than you had at the beginning. When you process information at the end of the process, you will have more information than you did at the beginning, which is the process of thinking. I mean, think about it. If I say something to you about anything, UFOs, and whatever it may be, and or the sun, or the earth, or your dogs, or you, and anything, you can take that bit of information and then be like, okay, if that's true, then it would imply this, and if that's true, then it would imply this, and if that's true, it would imply this, and if that's true, it would imply this. And if you started from something truly fundamentally true, you could probably continue that process forever, especially if you were doing it in the context of goals that were good goals, meaning like they were goals that could be achieved, essentially, or questions that could be answered, and you weren't asking bad questions, or you didn't construct bad goals. Bad goals cannot be achieved. Bad questions cannot be answered. So, but in good goals, good questions, these things can be achieved and understood and answered. And so, but you would be able to continue that process probably forever, as long as you continue to ask a good question, or to build on it with a good goal. And so, this is fascinating to me, and I think that integrated information theory is probably, it's going to be where we're definitely going to do an entire episode on it, but I need to do more research on it before I feel really comfortable kind of presenting the theory in and of itself. But I've been reading papers about it and watching people explain it and things like that, and I think that it is an amazing piece of work, because even if it's not quite as fundamental as it could be, which, I mean, I think sentient singularity theory is a little bit more fundamental, but it's almost the same, but it's just a bit more. And the only issue with it is, I would say the main difference is that mine doesn't even assume math. It doesn't have the goal of math, which integrated information theory does assume, because its goal in and of itself is to describe consciousness in a mathematical fashion, whereas my theory did not have that goal. It was to just model, to deduce what is and then model the mind, and that was it. In however I could do it, and mathematics arose from that, actually, and but it emerges from that, but it did not. I didn't have the goal of mathematically describing consciousness specifically. I mean, that would be a stupid goal of mine, because I don't know enough math, and also it's just a bad goal in and of itself, because consciousness precedes math, and you don't use math to explain consciousness. You use consciousness or sentience to explain math, and you'll get actually a lot more coherence if you do that, because it's the proper order. It is the proper hierarchy of things. So, but it's getting there. It's really getting there. I mean, but the thing is that it's founded on specific axioms that are kind of very often thought of as outside of the boundary of physics and stuff. And I don't even know if you could call this physics. But eventually it is. But it's not. And I think that the problem is that we, even in trying to understand fundamental reality through the lens of physics, is going to be wrong, because physics is, even at this point, it's fundamentally two different. There's two halves of it at minimum, and if maybe even two different fields. One of them would be relativity and Newtonian physics, thermodynamics and things like that, and then the other would be quantum mechanics and the Standard Model and elementary quote unquote particles. But that one specifically, it might be just metaphysics. But the issue is that it's so divorced from consciousness, and we think of these little particles as like intrinsically existing. And even though we, in higher level conversations about elementary physics or particle physics, it's at least stated very often that elementary particles are actually ripples, in the ether. They don't say the ether, but what else are you going to call it? But if that's true, then what's the context of the observation of a singular point instead of like a ripple? It's like, okay, well, consciousness. But and is that metaphysics at that point? And I don't know. But I tend to think that quantum mechanics and relativity, general relativity, and I'd put general relativity and Newtonian classical physics, thermodynamics and fluid dynamics and all that stuff together, and then I would separate probably quantum mechanics and recognize the reality that it's probably better described as metaphysics. But it needs to have an ontology to it in order for it to truly be metaphysics and to truly be understood. You must understand not just that an electron is, but what an electron is, why an electron is, and maybe even who an electron is. But I'm not saying that that's the best way to think about electrons, but yeah, I mean, this is tough because, like I've said about all of this stuff, is it requires scrapping everything and then building from nothing, but not from nothing. That's the thing, and that's the next clip that I want to show you that we'll talk about. But let me get to the chat. Okay, wow, there's a lot. Hey guys, what's up, memes of destruction? Who doesn't like cookies? I know, right? Who doesn't like cookies? This is that an internet cookies joke? No, it could be, but I didn't intend for it to be. Professor Einstein has attributed with one quote: "If I had an hour to solve the problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking of the problem and 5 minutes thinking of the solutions." That's such a good way of putting it. If you ask the right question, the answer will come to you naturally. You don't even have to figure out the answer. The question will provide the context necessary to frame the answer naturally, or at least tell you where to look, and then you would look, and then it would be there. Asking the right question is key. It makes it so that you almost cannot not find the right answer. But if you ask the wrong question, you cannot find the right answer. That is, what we have lost. Part of that is also from school, when we said things like there's no such thing as bad questions. I know what was meant by it. Usually it's just people who are, it's just teachers who are like telling little kids that they should ask questions and that it's good to understand things. And they're trying to encourage them to ask questions instead of discourage them and keep their mouths shut even if they have a question about something. But it does kind of transfer over and get applied to other situations in our experience where we think, okay, now that means there's no bad questions. No, there are bad questions. Bad questions are ones that don't have an answer. They cannot be answered because the setup of the question itself is implying that it's constraining the answer to a set of constraints that does not exist, essentially, or to have certain dimensions that the answer to the question that we were trying to actually ask would not actually have. So, but this next clip right here. This is Eric Weinstein's the beginning of his known to PowerPoint after his Oxford lecture on his geometric unity presentation, and there's some things that he states here that I love and that are so true, and then there is also a question that I think is actually a bad question, even though it's a better question than the questions that we usually ask in this when people are trying to understand fundamental physics, because asking this question might make you realize that there's a question that's actually better than this one, that is close to this one, but it's not actually a good question, and I'll explain why. But it's still, there's a lesson here.
So hopefully they won't be too serious, but we'll find out. So this is a supplementary explainer for the geometric unity talk at Oxford that you just saw. First of all, I think the most important thing to begin with is to ask what new hard problems arise when you're trying to think about a fundamental theory that aren't found in any earlier theory. Now, every time you have an effective theory, which is a partial theory, there is always the idea that you can have recourse to a lower level strata, so you don't have to explain, in some sense, everything coming from very little or nothing. I think that the really difficult issue that people don't talk enough about is the problem of the fire that lights itself. And I think this was beautifully demonstrated by M.C. Escher in his famous lithograph Drawing Hands, where he takes the idea of the canvas or the paper as a given, but somehow he imagines that the canvas could will into existence the ink needed to draw the hands that move the pen to draw the hands. That concept is actually the super tricky part, in my opinion, about going from effective theories to any attempt at a fundamental theory. So, with that said, what I want to think about is what antecedents does this concept have in physics? And I find that there really aren't any candidate theories of everything or unified field theories that I can find that plausibly give us an idea of how a canvas would will an entire universe into being. And so that really, to me, is the conceptual problem that I think bedevils this and makes this step quite a bit more difficult than some of the previous technical steps.
Okay, so I really like that he is asking this, but I also think that it's the wrong question. And the thing is that if you ask the right question or you contextualize it properly, then the answer to the question that he just asked is already present. You don't even have to try and answer it. Which, I remember when hearing him say this years ago. When he said, the question of a unified theory or fundamental theory is trying to figure out how do you get a fire that lights itself. But this assumes that your focus is on on the creation of things that don't yet exist and have not existed. But if you have a theory that implies that sentience is fundamental and that existence itself is sentient, could not be sentient, and even explains why it must be sentient, then you can, and you start from there, then the question is, how do you get multiplicity of sentience from a singularity of sentience? And then you can start thinking, then literally math unfolds before your very eyes. I mean, it is amazing. Math and even aesthetic unfolds before your eyes, and you start to understand where the rule of thirds comes from and why it is considered beautiful, and it's just amazing. But there is, where multiplicity of quantities comes from there is a model that I have for this, which is it's just my model of cosmogenesis essentially. But it's not a model of how do you get a fire that that lights itself. It is that my theory, sentient singularity theory, if you assume that fundamental reality is the fire, okay, then what you get is it is a theory of an eternal flame that has always been lit, must be lit, and could not be lit, and that how does it grow additional flames? How do you get multiple flames from one flame? And that flame is the totality of reality, and essentially. And it's like, this is a different type of situation. Reality is a fire that fuels itself. It is not a fire that lights itself. It's always been lit. This is the same exact problem. This same physics problem or problem that with this drawing hands that he's showing here. This is the same exact issue as where does life begin? It's like, well, how did life arise? It's like, maybe we've artificially constrained life to be defined too narrowly, and maybe if existence itself is sentient and sentience is life, then there was always life, and it's just a matter of how does each level of life manifest? What is the process that manifests each of these levels of life? It shows that if you're taking sentience to mean something that is alive is something that is sentient, which I think is something that we just intuitively assume usually, then it just means that the question itself of how did life begin is a bad question, because there is no answer to it, because it always existed. If existence is a single sentient being like you and me, is it alive? Okay, I would say yeah. If you're going to, if it doesn't, like, it almost means that life itself, the word life, is a bad word. If it in the way that we use it, it's that it needs a different definition that constrains it more to, being aware and consciously in the change space almost, or in a loop process of life, I guess, that has a beginning and an end, where you're born and then you die. You could call that being a life, but that is not the same exact thing as how we currently use it, which is the same issue again as us trying to define science and trying to define physics and trying to define philosophy. And this is what I mean by there is a systemic issue with study in and of itself. Every field of study is infected by this systemic issue that we currently have with how we study anything. And it is because how we study things is intentionally with the avoiding of an ontology or a context, and also avoiding to recognize, even though you can't really avoid it. Same thing with, avoiding an ontology. You can't really avoid it. That the basis of our understanding of the world must be founded on the first-hand understanding that we have that existence is sentient, because we experience it every day. There's nothing truer than than you are, because you feel it, like, constantly. You can't not feel it, actually. And the moment you don't feel it is the moment that you aren't sentient anymore. You are a robot, and you don't exist, really. There is no you. You are an emergent perspective of a pile of what we call matter, which we need to figure out what that is too. But that, if it's something different than sentience or disconnected from sentience and consciousness, and it's like, you're good luck. I don't think that it's possible to figure that out, but because I think that that's wrong. But yeah, it's we have a convoluted problem on our hands. But what's interesting is that there are certain theories that, while I think that they are still starting from not the foundations, even though they're almost there. They're like one step away, or not even, maybe a half step. Their fundamental axioms are correct, and the issue would be in them trying to be a mathematical description in and of itself, not one in which mathematics arises in certain instances, but one that is mathematically described, instead of structurally and quantitatively unfolding, which is very much sentient singularity theory's models. There is calculative aspect to my models. There's calculations and equations in every cell of every model, basically, except one. And then at the same time, the structure of where every cell is and how it is connected to previous cells is another component of this. It's not just something that is you can't just do it with an equation. This is the problem, is that it must be a simultaneous superposition of emergent equations and emergent quantities within an emergent structure, essentially. And you can do the best you can with that, because it's not, we can't really model that in a four-dimensional structure, which would be the closest thing to what is the truth. But we can model it in a two-dimensional structure or even a three-dimensional model, and but you can't model it completely accurately in a four-dimensional structure, which but you can get very close, and you can understand what it would mean to be modeled in a four-dimensional structure, I think. But if you look here, this is kind of the culmination of all my models put together. You have the cosmological cosmogenesis here, then you have each quantum of consciousness or quantized experience, essentially, and then you have the periodicity of sentience, essentially, all put into one cosmological verse, and then you also have it contextualized with creating the creation of others. But if you look, there is equations in every single cell, and there, you could put multiple different equations. There's like a superposition of equations in there. So, but you can't model that here. You'd have to have separate models for different perspectives of information calculation. But if you remove this one, everything goes to zero, because there is some type of compounding, entangled calculative aspect to these models, but there's also a structural aspect to them that is required for actually modeling it. We don't even know how to model a theory of everything in mainstream, academic circles, I don't think, because you have to do it in order to understand it. And you have to kind of admit that you have to start from scratch, which that's very hard to do if you've built a career on being part of the establishment. But yeah, I mean, it would be beautiful. I don't know of any more beautiful model than that. I really do mean that. I couldn't create something that beautiful if I had tried. I could have only done that if I wasn't trying to make something beautiful, and I was just trying to make something true, and then the reality would be that reality is beautiful. And it's not even as beautiful as reality is, because it's just a two-dimensional. It's one perspective of a two-dimensional model of four-dimensional reality that is also animated constantly and self-animated. It's a sentient model. So, or it's a sentient universe. It's a model of a sentient universe. So and of sentient beings within sentient beings. So it's like you just can't capture the true totality of the beauty, but you can experience it. Like that. That is experiencing the beauty firsthand of and meaning of our reality, which I think you cannot disconnect. And we've developed stigmas against certain things in science, like when Neil deGrasse Tyson says, or in science, I don't even know what to say anymore. Should we even say that? Or is that in and of itself framing this incorrectly? I don't know. Maybe we just say a scientific approach. I think that's the better way of putting it. But it you can't disconnect it from even theology and philosophy. And at least Eric Weinstein has admitted before that if you were going to understand the origin of the universe, then that should be left to philosophers and theologians, not physicists. And maybe geometric unity is not trying to be the most fundamental theory that could be created. It's meant to be more fundamental than any other theory of physics, quote unquote, that we currently have. Sorry, that's my dog. but it's still meant to be, limited and not completely fundamental. And I do think that I think all of these theories are essentially correct. I mean, integrated information theory is not it's not in competition with sentient singularity theory. This is the new framework that we also have to get past, that we also have to embrace and get past the old framework, which is that we're at this point where now there's going to be one fundamental theory that arises, and that's going to be that. And that it frames it as that all these other theories are competing. But the reality is that there's two families of theories that are competing, and that would be one that accepts sentience as a fundamental axiom or a fundamental assumption, and those that assume that it is an emergent, non-fundamental, process. Essentially, it's not something that exists always. It's something that was created at a certain point, and that point is somewhere after the initial condition, and also usually also after molecules and things like that, and atoms, and hadrons and things like that. But there is no evidence of this. In fact, there is evidence to the contrary, that it must be avoided, that comes from you and your firsthand experience. You literally have to deny your own self in order to do this, or you have to state at least that even if you don't deny your own self completely, you have to basically assume that you should not trust yourself above other outside, secondhand sources of information and third person observations, essentially. But the thing is that is a self-defeating stance to take, because you're still trusting your first-hand interpretation of all of these other outside, information sources and assumptions. And so you're just denying yourself as a good source of information in a single bit of context, which is the most fundamental context in and of itself, which is that should trust that you exist. It's self-defeating to the point where I cannot logically explain to you even it in a way that is not just gonna break apart as I try and describe it, which is what's happening. This is what happens when you're dealing with fundamental reality. You can only you cannot actually describe that which isn't, or that which isn't true, which is all of a sudden that's not even as fundamental as we could go, though you would say cannot describe that which isn't. And so things start to change as you get that deep, but and even how you talk about it. So so you would get like Sean Carroll's models of his many worlds model. That would be a competitor to sentient singularity theory. I would say it's also a competitor to geometric unity and then also integrated information theory and conscious agent theory, and even the autodidactic universe, probably, and the CTMU and all these other theories that kind of place awareness and therefore self-awareness, which is the only kind of awareness there is, as a fundamental axiom, and or as an axiomatic assumption. Those theories are competitors. That's it. And any theory that is consistent with or affirmative of or assuming of sentience being a fundamental fundamental axiom that is at its foundation or at its even eventual deduction, like that would, or eventual assumption, that those would not be competing. They must be explored as being contextualizing and complementary of each other, but they also must be put into a hierarchy of fundamentality at the same time. And that means navigating a lot of human egos and things like that as well. But it's a good thing, you know. At the beginning of this project, I've talked about this before many times, or much more often, when I would start to see things like, oh, if I saw integrated information theory early on in this project, I would be like, not very early on in this project, because very early on I just wanted to contribute. But then, or at certain points though, when I was more dedicated to my own, presenting my work as its own theory, essentially, with a label, a name, then I would see works like that, and I would be like, that was consistent with mine or similar, and I would get anxiety, and I would be like, oh my gosh, like, what if they get it before me? You know, what if they beat me? What if not even just that, more deeply is like, what if all this work that I've been doing is not actually for any reason? It's like somebody else has already done it, so why have I become so motivated in this project? And that was like anxiety inducing. But I realized later that we need a bunch of pieces of work to start seeing each other as pieces of a whole, and as allied attempts, so that they can start to contextualize each other. You can't just go from the current assumptions of consciousness being emergent and matter being intrinsic or fundamental and not emergent, and then to conscious agent theory. You'd have to scrap everything there first, which is hard, because you why scrap everything and just trust that this hopefully works? What we need to do is build a new network of complementary pieces of work that are reinforcing of each other and supporting of each other, and also are arranged into a hierarchy that is dependent on two things: a hierarchy of fundamentality of existence, and study itself, kind of, is math even assumed to exist in your from at the beginning of your work, or does it emerge, or do you assume that the standard model exists, and or does it emerge? Do you assume a four-dimensional manifold exists, or does it emerge from a singularity? These are ways in which you can start to arrange these theories, these pieces of work, into a hierarchy of fundamentality. But also, the hierarchy will also change, and the arrangement will also change depending upon your goal. So if your goal is to, go through wormholes and from one side of the universe to the other, or something like that, then maybe geometric unity is the one that you focus on, and it's contextualized by some that are fundamentally preceding it. At least one theory would, if it's not the most fundamental, then it would be contextualized by at least a single other theory. But then maybe geometric unity is, the way it's described and what its focus is better for that than others. And then maybe if you wanted to, create some type of free energy principle, then you would focus on Carl Friston's work or conscious agent theory or something, and then those would be contextualized by the most fundamental theory that we could write. But ultimately we have to admit that that ultimate reality is not a theory. A theory of fundamental reality is a framework about the process and the dimensions, and aka the constraints and degrees of freedom, and also the goals and things like that, of a sentient being that is fundamental reality. It's like the statement that, you know, the Tao that can be said is not the true Tao, meaning also the Tao that is written cannot be the true Tao, meaning the theory cannot be. It's not fundamental reality. It's kind of an overview, a description, but it isn't in and of itself. But it can get extremely close, like to the point where it has to follow the patterns of the process that fundamental reality has to is constrained to. You know, which is a mind. You know, the process of mind. So even the theory itself has to be naturally follow this. If you had to try and artificially arrange it into that pattern, and then you're gonna probably be wrong. But if you couldn't not, then it probably would be correct. So this is just an interesting, you know, space to be in, because there's so much that has to be kind of scrapped and then reassessed and reaccumulated and recontextualized that does currently exist, but cannot be built on in order to go more fundamental. You don't. You have to dig. You have to start at the bottom to build a house. You don't start at the top and build down. You have to start at the most solid foundation that you can, and build from there and frame things properly. So this is true of also the scientific endeavor, which I don't know how much that isn't also the engineering endeavor, which would be the endeavor to also just do the most good with to deduce the most truth and do the most good with that understanding. And so it's tough because it's like, do we even need a label for that? Some people would call that religion. I don't even think that's a good label. Maybe we you know, it's funny because the most observant people of any kind of theological tradition in the world, Muslims, Jews, you know, any group, they wouldn't say this is my religion. They would say that religion, they don't believe in religion. That this is truth and they're just following truth. And there's something true about that, you know, if truth is unified, and which it has to be. Otherwise, there is no such thing as truth. Like, really, because truth contextualizes other truths. So you can't have isolated truths. This is true according to my perspective, but maybe it's not true according to your perspective. No, it's like there is what your perception is your perception. That's true, but that doesn't mean that it isn't in the context of it isn't contextualized by the perceptions of beings higher in the hierarchy, or even beings around you sometimes. So truth contextualizes truth, and if it doesn't, then there's no truth. There's not even a point to truth or pursuit of truth, and it all falls apart. You can to the point where you can't even talk about it anymore because there's nothing to talk about. And that's like you have to discover this stuff on your own almost. This was one of my greatest concerns about bringing this project to the public is if it's true, then it should be known. But if it should be known, it's implied in the work itself that you can't teach it. It has to be allowed to be learned, not be taught, in a way. And I mean, it can be, some things can be taught, but like, in order to understand it, it must be learned, it cannot be taught and be understood. This is true of everything, but it's especially true of this. And the implications are even higher because we're kind of acknowledging that it's an attempt at understanding fundamental reality, whereas everything else, we don't think of it that way. But but yeah, so the consequences have kind of more limits, whereas the consequences of certain misunderstanding certain things that are especially fundamental will lead to cascading misunderstandings across all fields and all goals and all pursuits and all in all contexts. And so that is, I think that if this is true, then if there is a fundamental theory and it is, and the overall implications are similar to my work or integrated information theory or conscious agent theory or whatever, then CTMU, then what it implies is that we cannot teach it in our current system properly. It cannot be learned, is a better way of putting it, in our current academics institutions. Really, it cannot. And that is an amazing thing. It's a very freeing thing because, for one, I no longer have to convince academia, traditional academia, and the institutions, and those that are in in the institutions that are established, of the truth of this. I have no need to send my theories to Sean Carroll in the mail so he can try and and then pray that he tries to understand them. And by the way, I never have done that. I've never sent my theory to anybody before, and I won't unless they ask for it. If they ask for it, then I'll have a discussion with them about it, and I'll send them things and stuff. But I will not just send my work to people in physics departments. And the reason for that, for one, is I just know that they get that all the time, and they have no reason to take mine more seriously than anyone else's, without any further context. And also because I think that it's lacking. It's just everything about that situation is, it's against the implications of my work, completely. Just the way that we even teach in those institutions and things like that. I think it would be an incredible tragedy if we did not change our education system at all about, that from our current model and then they started teaching sentient singularity theory in physics class. That would be horrible, I think. And I think about that too, a lot. It's like I think that would be worse than them never adopting it, never even acknowledging its existence. I'd rather them ignore it forever. I really mean that, than teach it in our current classroom setting. It has to be something that, and this is something Chris Langan has done seems to have done pretty well, but I'm not so integrated in his group, so or even with his work to know for sure. But it seems like, just knowing the people that I know who follow his work, that there is also an emphasis on living it and incorporating it into your daily life and being part of communities and that are working on that. And I think that is a necessary thing when it comes to understanding reality fundamentally. But that's part of the reason why I stress marriage so much on this channel, is because I think that it is one of the ways in which we start to form that setting that you can, where the lessons of sentient singularity theory are obvious and apparent and intuitive. They're not something that has to be artificially taught and are not connect or disconnected from your everyday experience. It's we want a setting in which those who are paying attention to my work are actually experiencing its implications firsthand. so they're not just taking my word for it. That would be horrible. Do not take my word for it. If this does not make sense to you, do not believe me. Really, that would be terrible. That's idol worship. That's terrible. It's like you're just assuming somebody is so smart or something and that's why they're probably right. Because it's like you should not believe the CTMU is onto anything or is true because Chris Langan has the highest IQ measured in America. That would be idol worship. That's horrible. You should believe that the CTMU is valuable and has truth in it and is worth investigating and understanding because you see the truth in it constantly all the time, not because you know that his IQ is the highest measured in the United States. So there's, that's what I think we need to like realize is that if we're gonna teach these theories of fundamental reality, they need to be not just taught in a disconnected context. They need to be experienced and learned, not taught, not just taught, but guided almost maybe, but not taught. This is not something for people to memorize and then get quizzed on. It's something for people to experience and see and feel, especially feel, constantly in their life. So that's means that I don't know how really to teach this other than to encourage also then to be as honest as I can as I go through the process myself, and transparent, but also be recognizing and admitting of that there's contexts in which you're much more likely to be able to, you won't be able to avoid learning the truth about certain implications of my work, like marriage. And so, yeah. I mean, it's funny how much people want to understand gender and not get married. Good luck. You want to go, what, you're going to study it in a book? Even watching my videos on it's like, if you don't have really, really good firsthand experience in a context that is proper to understand these things, that you're not going to truly understand it as well as you could. Same thing goes with everything else, It's funny because there's been so many people that go into these caves and in history and in legends, and these gurus or whatever, they go into this cave and then by themselves they just come up with the answers of the world, and for one, I'm not saying that they didn't. I'm just saying that if they did, then they probably were not alone. They were really very, very much all the time constantly acknowledging that they were with God, and maybe the lack of distraction from other people allows them to focus on that relationship. But if you were just in a cave by yourself and you didn't believe that there was sentient existence with you all the time that you were able to communicate with in some way, and you also didn't experience meaning by impacting others, then the only thing that you would be able to understand meaning is by realizing that you felt meaningless because you weren't impacting on anyone else, which maybe that is actually the beginning maybe of understanding meaning, is feeling meaningless. I think it is actually. I think God felt meaningless and it was meaningless, realized it, and then that's how he understood what meaning was. But I don't know if it would be the same for us because we have intrinsic meaning. So this is an active process. Understanding the existence is an active process. It is not just memorization of a textbook. or of equations. It's a participatory interaction. Okay. Professor Einstein is attributed to the quote. The first question is answered by each person by what they desire in the moment. No. Getting some feedback, Tyler, audio input. I hope that it's not bad right now. Let me see. First question is answered by each person. Okay, it seems like it's good now, but the narrow path is acting morally, but also, just as importantly, thinking in a way that isn't in error. Yeah, that's definitely true. If a parrot squawked, I think squawk, therefore I am. Would the parrot be both correct and incorrect simultaneously? Because the parrot is only incidentally correct. The words don't have any meaning. Yeah. I don't know if the parrot is correct or incorrect, because I don't think it has a goal if it's just repeating. It's just... But yeah, I see what you're saying. I think you're making a reference to like people who repeat that statement, I think therefore I am. And it's like a parrot doing it. Don't the Hebrews don't know God's personal name? I think that's almost like a... It's like not... It doesn't matter almost. It's that God... You can't say God's name. When people say like, oh, you don't pronounce Yod Hey Vav Hey because like that and that's God's name, Yehovah or something like that, and it's like that's bad if you do it. What's bad is that you're thinking that that's God's name, as in like a name like your name necessarily, and that it's exactly the same, and it's more that is kind of an explanation of God's name in some Jewish metaphysics that as far as I understand, is that Yod Hey Vav Hey, and it's like an explanation of God's name, but it isn't God's name itself. So it's the same exact thing as saying the true Tao cannot be spoken, is the same thing as saying you cannot say God's name. But it's been now assumed to mean you shouldn't say God's name. But it's more that you shouldn't think that you can say God's name because you can't. There's more to this. I'm a casual listener and fan, and that's fine. I've got my own views. I don't know if you forgot, but some stream ago, even Tyler explained that entropy is a point of view regarding where in the ecosystem is you. Okay. Entropy on the universe is something you haven't experienced firsthand. In this place, things decay, but then regenerate anew. I think we've all experienced entropy. What does it mean to be self-destructive? I think you start to experience entropy, but yeah, I mean, I think I have experienced entropy, but I also think it's emergent. It's an emergent perception. It's not. It's due to you not moving and the universe moving, and you're not moving with it. It's like a train. It's the whole. It kind of to the relativity metaphor of like if a train is going by, if you're like running by it and you're running the same speed, it looks like you're not moving, but if you're running faster, then it looks like you're moving forward, and then which you are in both of those instances in some ways, but then if you are running slower or you stop, then it looks like you're moving backwards in a way, but it's not really you moving backwards. It's that the universe is moving, and your job is to keep up, to some degree. That's what it wants. It doesn't want you to stop moving. It drags everybody else around you as well, a bit, including the universe, I think. And so eventually you won't be allowed to drag forever. Well, it's been good to be an independent thinker. Well, A framework I use to build my conviction on something is to come up with a proper steelman argument for the other side. Is it possible to construct any counter arguments to I think therefore I am? That's a very, very good question. And I think that actual thinking, my model of initial thinking process, which was the first model I ever made, which was, where is it? It's, where is it here? I don't know where it is exactly, but it's somewhere in here. Decision tree right here. It starts with this: reject the current default status or assumption, assume the opposite of your current default status or assumption is true, and then look for evidence that the newly adopted assumption is correct. It's basically steelmanning. It is also the internalization of the scientific method, essentially, whereas the scientific method is the externalization of this process. It is the only way to truly think about something. You can't look for evidence of your current assumption and think that you're thinking about and be thinking about it honestly and being truly considerate, like rigorously considering of your position, because you're already with what you've already observed around you. You're not looking for any new information. You're just looking for information that's already there. You're not you're not changing your perspective. You have to change your perspective completely in order to see new information, if it is there. And so you have to assume that it's there to see. If you assume it's not even there to see, then you won't look for it properly. And this is why I said, if you're looking for God and you don't see him, it means that your conceptualization of what or who God is wrong. If God exists, that's what that means. Because God is everywhere, and you would see him constantly already every day, if you understood who he was, if he did exist. But if he does exist and he's everywhere, then and you don't see him, it means that you're misconceptualizing of his characteristics and his character probably too. But this is proper thinking. It is how you change your mind honestly. But so trying to construct a very good steelman of the other side is a good strategy. In fact, I would say it's basically the only strategy that exists in order to think about something, as far as thinking about something goes. Any other thing is not thinking about something. You're tricking yourself into thinking that you're thinking about it, which is maybe you're thinking about something else because you're thinking, but you're not thinking about what we're supposed to be thinking about. If you're trying to think about whether or not, I don't know, UFOs are what UFOs are, then you have to, and you don't have, you want to change your assumption about it. Like, if you already believe they're aliens or something, then you have to assume that they're not and look for evidence that they're not. And then if you assume that they aren't and they're just, balloons or something in the sky and that they always have a conventional explanation, then you have to assume that they don't, and you really have to look for evidence that there is evidence of other technological, craft flying around that aren't made by humans as we know it. So that's true of every kind of idea that you want to entertain, whether it's God or UFOs or marriage or I don't know, theories of everything. But I had something else that I was going to mention here. I think, but somebody asked me once, this was what I was going to say, is if your fundamental assumption or the fundamental message of your theory is wrong, and that sentience is not fundamental, really that's what that means is if I'm truly fundamentally wrong. It means that sentience is an emergent thing and it doesn't exist intrinsically as the nature of reality, or of existence. That was a better way of putting it. Then what would be the case? What would be true if that wasn't the case? And somebody asked me that, and I said, it's a great question. This was years ago. Some guy studying physics. And I said, I'll get back to you. I need to think about it to make sure that I really think about it that deeply. And the conclusion that I came to when I went back to him and I said, I realize this is very inconvenient sounding. Or it sounds either very convenient, but it appears to me to be very inconvenient. But I do believe that it's true. Is that if I'm fundamentally wrong and existence isn't at its, in its initial state, a single sentient being, most fundamentally, then none of us would be here. Nothing would be here. We wouldn't be here. Nothing would be here. And they were like, well, that's awfully convenient. So you're saying that everything is evidence that you're correct, and therefore there is no way to perceive, and there would be no way to even perceive anything if you were incorrect. And I said, yeah, I see what that I see how that makes it sound. It's like basically like saying I can't possibly be wrong. But the thing is this: when you're talking about fundamental reality and the nature of fundamental reality, wouldn't that be the truth? You know? Like, if you really think about, like, what, if you take it with all the assumptions that we currently have and you disregard mine, and you're assuming the existence of entropy as a default, intrinsic reality and constraint, and you assume all these other, emergently observed, maybe limited perspectives, and without contextualizing them in my framework, there is no explanation for them. So our first-hand experience, and we know that because we keep asking the question, where did life come from? Where did the universe come from? It's like, how did something come from nothing? We ask that, which seems to be self-defeating. And how does life emerge in an anti-entropic in an entropic environment? How does growth occur? Without life already existing in an entropic landscape. Like, this is none of this makes sense, and it would make sense that whatever it was, the implications of a fundamental theory being right or wrong would apply to everything. They wouldn't be, oh, well, maybe the sun would be a little redder. Or like, oh, well, we would have half the amount of life in the universe that we currently have. Or we would have two suns instead of, one. We couldn't have any solar systems with one sun. Like, it wouldn't be anything like that. It would be, the implications and the effects would be total from a fundamental theory, especially the fundamental axiom or determination or lesson or idea or concept of a fundamental theory. Not even just like the pattern or a model of a pattern that's assumed or that appears to be, intrinsic, but the actual like basic assumption. Of course, it would impact everything. And so when I later on, I was frustrated at first when I realized that this was what genuinely appeared to be the case. But then later, like, I don't know how much later, but quite a bit later probably, I realized that was evidence that I was probably onto something, because that would be the reality of the situation, is that the effects would be total, and so I don't know, it was like actually like supportive of of the axiom that I was stating being correct, which is that sentience is a fundamental nature of reality. And so, yeah, I mean, it was just interesting. You do have to do that kind of thing. I'm not saying it's useless to do that. I'm just saying that when you do that and you've got a fundamental theory, I think that, you know, if you've got this framed properly, the impacts would not be isolatable if you were, you know, looking at whether or not your fundamental assumption is correct or not. It would not be isolatable. It would be like total. And if it's not total, then it's not. It's you're misunderstanding what a fundamental theory is. It's not just, oh well, there would be 2 generations of matter instead of 3, or there would be actually 11 dimensions to space instead of 4. It's like, no, there would be, you know, everything or nothing. Things would be the way they are, or they wouldn't. You know, everything would be different, and completely different. And if everything is completely different from that which exists, then it would just, you can't get much more different than that which, than nothing exists and no one existing. You know, so maybe the difference between sentient singularity theory and some other theory, I don't know how I would even propose this, because I don't know if it's even possible, but that are very similar in their basic assumptions, but there's a difference in like model, or there's a difference in how you approach, you know, growth and periodicity of growth, then yeah, you could start talking about different kinds of things. Like, people often will be like, when they're talking about scaling sentience. That's a really good way of putting it. I should put that in my paper, like the scaling of sentience in some way. When you're talking about scaling sentience, they'll be like, oh, it's an atom and then a cell and a molecule and a organism, or an atom, a molecule, cell, and organism, and then they'll be like planet, solar system, galaxy, universe, and my model is different. That doesn't follow lineage basis. That's following a size scale type of pattern, which is observed within relativity, which means it's not fundamental, and it doesn't follow a lineage where each one builds the previous. Whereas a lineage-based fundamental system would explain why you would also perceive the periodicity and scaling, or scaling in the same periodic fashion around us in relativity, but it wouldn't be the fundamental scaling or leveling of it. But it would be like an emergent view. It'd be a shadow. That's what it is. It's like, if there's if the size of perceived systems scales in octaves, that, according to sentient singularity theory's approach, being a lineage-based approach, would be true, but it would be an emergent perspective that is basically a shadow of the fundamental periodicity, which would be lineage-based instead of scale-based. So any kind of scaling periodicity that you would see in relativity, according to size or speed even, or something like that, you would see those, but they would be shadows of the fundamental assembly structure. They wouldn't be the actual assembly structure. And so that's just a pretty good way of articulating, I think, kind of the relationship between certain things. One of the guys I want to talk to more, and I've talked to him once on Curt's channel when there was like the Tonanza, was Chris Leto, and we didn't really, he has his own YouTube channel, he talks a lot about UFOs, and we didn't really get a chance to speak that much, but he said something that resonated a lot with me, which was that he has a theory that kind of shows that the universe scales in octaves, and that seemed consistent in quantity with my work, but not in that it's in its focus. But the fact that he's got the same quantity implies that there's truth to it, and that there's kind of some type of connection there. And I think that that's what it is. It's basically like a shadow of the fundamental assembly is like the scaling, the octaves types of scaling, and that we would see that in all kinds of places. But it's same thing with space-time being four-dimensional. That's a shadow of a four-dimensional manifold structure of mind. So like inside, outside, separate, and oneness, which is kind of the base foundation of my work. Right here. These four dimensions of mind would be the fundamental structure, manifold structure essentially, that is responsible for the quadratic shadow that we see in other things all over the place. Everything from, certain rules that are four fundamental rules to how you do certain tasks in order to do them correctly, to linguistic rules, and to space-time itself, being four-dimensional. It would be that 4D space-time is a shadow of a manifold structure that is also four-dimensional, but is more fundamental than space and time. It's not relativistic, and so and those four primary perspectives allow you to navigate and orient outside of relativity. You don't have to be bigger, use words like bigger than, smaller than, next to, far from, close to, faster than, slower than, stronger than, weaker than, nothing like that. That's all relativistic language you would use, but you would still be able to orient within a system of multiplicity, and the relationships of that system, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. There is no, they're all simultaneously interconnected, and simultaneously manifested by and defined by each other, but they're also not requiring of each other in a relativistic way, which of like speed and size and strength and brightness or anything like that. So it's interesting. I've never thought about exactly like phrasing it like that, which is good. Very cool. Anyways, please hit the like button. If you have any final questions, comment them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to start to wrap up. I really appreciate everybody here today. I ask that you have some grace for me going forward as things just get more and more chaotic in my life as we get closer to and also after my child is born. And please, if you do believe in prayer, and even if you don't, I would appreciate it. It is with the sheer number of steps that have to take place, perfectly built on each other, in order to manifest in a baby at all. Not even, let alone like a baby that's perfect. Which, like, what is a perfect baby? Right? A perfect baby meaning like healthy and alive, even being born. It is not consistent with even the concept of probability. It either is, the probability that it either works or it doesn't is either 0 or 100, and you really see that, and also you see that you have no control over the creation of a sentient being, which, it's funny, I saw like Lee Cronin, who works on assembly theory, which I actually think has a lot to it, and a lot of application and a lot of truth. He said assembly theory will help us understand how to make life in a lab. And I was like, dude, we cannot make a sentient being. We can make the conditions necessary for a sentient being to be created, but an additional sentient being cannot be created unless a piece of the initial sentient being is like taken and added from the initial sentience to a new context, which would be like a new baby or something. It's not taking from your sentience. You can't take from your sentience and add a new sentient being. You have to take from the initial sentience every single time. And that means that like every single one of these is, every time someone new is created, it is a direct action by God. It's which, it's a miracle. And that's the definition of a miracle. It's a direct action by God. Maybe that is outside the realm of natural causation and the rules of existence. And that's what creation of an additional sentience is. Maybe not the biological process that we observe surrounding it, but the metaphysical process that actually supports it is not something that just occurs inevitably. It's something that must occur intentionally. It's amazing. And it's hard to see that if you're not experiencing it firsthand even. But anyways, thank you guys. Tyler Goldstein admitting he has never done drugs. No, I went through college and I experimented with drugs in college. I don't do drugs now, but I had my time. It wasn't any like, I didn't really ever suffer much from like doing any kind of serious drugs, but I experimented with plenty of different kinds of drugs when I was in college, but I do not do that at all. I'll have like a glass or two of wine at a wedding, and that's it. But at this point in my life, but I don't know where that comment came from, like about drugs. But I've never claimed not to do drugs. But I've never claimed not to have done drugs. I have done drugs, but I don't do drugs. Bacteria never stop working. They can't self-reflect to realize they are only bacteria. I don't know about that. I think bacteria are self-aware, and I think they do probably stop working at some point, but it's just whether or not we realize it. It doesn't tell you who you are, though. Framework. I don't know what you mean by that. But, yeah. With that, thank you guys. Yeah, like I said, please hit the like button, share this, and I appreciate everybody who joined in the chat. And I will be here next week. Peace.